It's become more and more obvious how right Nick is in a lot of ways. This is how you get Ben Shapiro saying that the single greatest guarantor of his allegiance to America is the existence of Israel. As the genocide in Gaza has gone on over the last 2 years, and we've seen the Israeli faction's mask come off more and more.
So recently, Ian Carroll covered the feud between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes that's broken out recently after the two exchanged some blows on various podcasts on issues pertaining to Israel and other things, and who was right about Israel first and who's playing the bigger role in turning people against Israel. I want to get Ian's take on this. This is a highly requested thing within my comments section to comment on. Don't know how I'll feel about it, Ian's take, but we'll see. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And now, on to Nick Fuentes, and the main story of the week, in my opinion, in probably most people's opinion. What started out as an unforced error by Tucker Carlson has ballooned into what feels like a turning point in right-wing American politics this last week. It started a week prior when Tucker interviewed Candace on his show, and they both attacked Nick Fuentes openly and called him sort of a controlled opposition, bad faith actor who is presumably here to delegitimize sane voices. Nick fired back a week ago, publishing last week's Friday stream all about Tucker Carlson's history and his father's history, and it went super viral. I think that the best way to summarize it is just to watch this Studio Ghibli edit that presumably a fan made of the exchange.
Well, before we get into that, I want to comment, just provide one point of clarification. In that interview that Tucker had with Candace Owens, he also did compliment Fuentes on being a very great orator, a great broadcasting talent, and that's something I think you can't take away from Fuentes. I don't follow him closely, actually, but the clips I've seen of him does seem to show someone that's very good at conveying his thoughts. That is the truth, regardless of what you might think about people in this feud, who's in the right or wrong, but I guess we'll take a look. All right, before we get Ian to chime in on this, I want to just say some things. One of the biggest wedges that's being driven into this conversation is who was opposed to Israel first, who spoke out about Israel's atrocities first, etc. And I'll be honest, I don't care that much about that now when we're looking at the atrocities happening in Gaza. Sure, it matters, it's relevant. It's really important to be right about things, especially when they're particularly controversial. And I guess you have to say that Nick was ahead of the curve when it comes to the right on that. Of course he was. But at the same time, it kind of matters to have the biggest voice in the alternative media, in the new independent media on the right, having the right viewpoint on that. And one of the top ones in Candace Owens. So I was talking about Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens respectively there, but that's relevant in and of itself. So for those people to be attacking each other when really the end game should be doing whatever we can to stop the Israel first mentality, the atrocities in Gaza, the fact that Israel has so much political influence in the United States, that seems to me a little bit more important than who was right first on Israel. I was once a neocon. I was very wrong about the war in Iraq and supporting the neocons and Project for the New American Century. That was garbage and bogus. It's embarrassing. I've had to do a penance for that. And there were great, libertarians and anti-war dissidents long before me that spoke about the horrors of those things. But it's not relevant to what we do about that now. Once our eyes are awakened, let's do the right thing together. And that's the most frustrating thing about this feud to me.
He's got the frogs on the jacket, the Groiper frogs on the jacket. I mean, it's just come on. Come on. How... you can't, come on, that's art. Let's be real. Even if it's even if you're the butt of that joke, I would hope that Tucker and Candace can watch that clip and be like, that's kind of art. That's pretty epic.
Yeah, maybe so. I guess they probably can. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them comes out and says, yeah, I guess that's a good video or something, or that's a good production, that's good propaganda supporting Fuentes' side. There's no doubt about that. But I think their underlying claim does have some merit too. Some of the biggest kerfuffles, the biggest feuds that Fuentes has been in with have been people like Dave Smith and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, people that are really good on the Israel issue from the right. And I think there is something to say about that. Those aren't great topics if your ultimate objective really is to end the Israel first mentality. It's not to say, haha, told you so, I was right before you were, and that you're duplicitous scum. I don't think that's right. And I'm not absolving Candace or Tucker of any wrongdoing either. I think it's wrong to call Fuentes a gay kid if you don't know that, and it doesn't seem like that's totally clear to everyone. I don't know that that's true, and I don't think he's really been very clear about his personal life and his sexuality, things like that. So I don't think that was fair from Tucker, for sure. But again, the goal should be uniting people across the spectrum and across the right against Israel, rather than putting this big wedge between major voices on this topic. And it's hard to deny that's happening. Whether you think it's Tucker and Candace doing that or Nick doing that, I don't know, but I can say historically, before this feud broke out, Fuentes was really bad towards some great critics of Israel, like Dave Smith, who even had Nick Fuentes on his podcast years ago, like in 2018 or 2017 or something. Dave Smith is one of the most effective critics of Israel, and he was slammed by Nick Fuentes too. It just seems like a lot of the feuds that Nick gets into are very good on this issue. So again, it seems to be shelving a higher level goal for the purpose of driving a wedge, maybe making profit on it. I don't know. But, as far as I can see, all three of these people are right about the Israel issue.
Regardless of the points and everything. And it took the internet by storm, like art. It went super viral. Clips from that Friday stream of Nick's went super viral. Edits like that of the stream went super viral. And then the Groypers and everyone that is pro Nick Fuentes started digging into Tucker and exposing all kinds of old clips and stuff like that. So, I mean, love him or hate him, it was powerful. Well, last Friday night, this most recent one, Nick aired part 2 of his Tucker Carlson expose. And once again, he was on fire all night long. I don't even mean ideologically, although I think that too. Like, even if you disagree with him, just looking at the skill of orating, the skill of weaving together a live stream, a show, which is not easy to do. Nick is one of the best to do it in 2025. And this was one of his best ever. And it was all live. There was no script. There was none of this. Like, I mean, obviously he has producers and he had information and like a screen to help him with his facts, but it was all live.
Yeah, again, it's hard to deny he has skill in that arena. That's a skill that's hard to teach. It's hard to learn. He has it, whatever it is. I don't think you're necessarily, developing that skill very well. It's an intrinsic quality that he excels at. That's true. At the same time, people like Candace and Tucker are amazing at having podcasts too. Tucker's amazing at having interviews. Candace is amazing at presenting podcasts too. They're all talented in their own right. Ian's focusing more on Fuentes here, but there's a reason these people are in the position that they are. They are very talented, bright people. Whether or not you disagree with them or agree with them on various issues, the issues of the day, I think that can be said categorically.
And that is super impressive. This week, he didn't actually target Tucker as much as the entire mainstream conservative media apparatus, the neoconservative movement, and the CIA largely. It was highly informative, and you should watch it. If you do, Nick's show is on Rumble, and you have to skip about an hour and 40 minutes in because Nick has like an hour and a half of B-roll pre-stream edit stuff that I don't really understand, but I think I'm just an old man because I don't understand how streaming works. It seems to work fine for him. So just skip way in until you see his green shirt. With highly polarizing figures like Nick Fuentes or Alex Jones or any of these people that get big smear campaigns, you should really go directly to the source. Don't let other people gatekeep for you. Don't let them tell you what to think of him. Go watch for yourself and form your own opinion. And know that it is complicated and there's a lot of backstory. And Nick has said a lot of things in the past, a lot of things in the present, and you got to judge carefully and kindly and cautiously and think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the way society should be, that even if there are controversial voices and he has been shadow banned or banned outright from many social media networks, it behooves us all to take a look at what he's saying, even if we vehemently disagree, to come up with, the refutations for the things he's saying if you don't believe in him. If he really is as anti-Semitic as people say, you should have counter arguments for that to slam in his face. And if they're convincing, people will be won over to that more, unless in comparison to if you just shut Fuentes down. I think a lot of Fuentes' allure is that he has been shut down by so many social media platforms, just like Alex Jones before him, and that has made him a compelling voice to many people. I haven't followed him nearly as closely as some of the others that I react to and cover on this channel, but again, that's true regardless of who we're talking about. If they're controversial and banned, that is just going to raise eyebrows of a lot of dissidents to check that person out, but you might not always agree with them.
Think for yourself. Now, during the stream, Nick covered a lot of information and wove together a lot of history. Now Pat Buchanan is going super viral. If you know, you know. Groypers are all posting Pat Buchanan hype tracks all over Twitter. But one of the central points that Nick teased out was the difference between being anti-neoconservative, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, versus actually talking about Jewish identity as a part of that issue. Why it matters, in Nick's opinion, to actually discuss the critical Jewish element in the middle of this divide. And honestly, I used to fall more on Tucker's side of this debate than on Nick's. I used to share Tucker's perspective that Nick was rash and toxic and went about talking about these things in ways that were too extreme and too racial and would delegitimize the conversation. And there is an argument to be made that Nick has changed his tune over the last year or two as he has grown up and gotten more skilled and more mature and maybe just changed his strategy a little bit. Nick certainly did used to be more rebellious and flippant and dismissive and just, young. And that's fine.
Yeah, Ian's right. That is at the crux of a lot of discussions about Zionism and Israel first policy, U.S. policy toward Israel, the Jewish identity and how it plays into all this. But it's not necessarily a topic that needs to be lumped in the categorization of, race relations. This is a cultural thing, too. You can find Christians across the world that have different cultural practices as people in the United States. And the same thing is true to an extent with Jewish people. Certainly so. Where they are located, what their background is, has a lot of implications on how they will act. But there's no doubt that many of the Zionist zealots believe that, they have a right to rule over other people and subjugate them. That's not to say that that's true of all Jews, especially, I disproportionately have Jewish critics of Israel on this show that I react to, and that's certainly not true with them, but it does play a major role in a lot of Jewish support for Israeli policies. He's right about that.
Nick actually talked about that in this live stream. But as the genocide in Gaza has gone on over the last 2 years, and we've seen the Israeli faction's mask come off more and more, it's become more and more obvious how right Nick is in a lot of ways. Not all Jewish people support Israel, but all Jewish people who support Israel support it because they are Jewish, right? Like, it's an extremely uncomfortable conversation for everyone.
I don't know if I even agree with that it's only because they're Jewish that they support Israel. There's a lot of secular Jews that support Israel that wouldn't even, identify as Jews in the same way as other Jews that support it for other reasons, whether they bought into the propaganda that, Israel's just defending itself, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. You don't have to have judgments related to your identity as a Jew to defend it. Of course, I think that's wrong. I am a big critic of Israel. You guys know that. You watch this channel. It's unavoidable. I get slammed for it all the time. I'm an anti-Semite, right? Despite the fact that half the videos I react to are good Jewish critics of Israel, it seems like. But that's the case.
Especially if you were raised in this politically correct era in America that I was and that Tucker was and that everyone else was. Unless you're really young, right? Like Nick's age and younger. And Nick's not that young, but these, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, these guys have been growing up in a world that is slightly more awake to the wokeness, so to speak. But race matters, right? These things matter. They're real. They're not you can't just dismiss them from the conversation as though they weren't a factor in reality, right? Would the U.S. government ever hire a Chinese national to work with classified military secrets? No, right? That would be a dumb idea. China is trying to steal our classified military secrets. They always are. So it would be idiotic to hire Chinese nationals into those programs that they are trying to steal information from, right? Even if they weren't loyal to China, how would you ever know that for sure? Right? You would be worried about the possibility in a way that you wouldn't be worried if you had hired like Norman McAllister or like, you know?
Yeah, there's certain criteria that could be red flags to raise, heightened awareness of the sorts of people you're hiring to handle classified information. Of course, I think the idea of classified information, on the massive scale that it is today is a bad idea in general. I want a more transparent society, one that doesn't violate our rights and, hide the fact that they have a mass surveillance state headed by the NSA and the PRISM program, bulk collecting our data from our telecom providers and from internet providers. Like, that's absurd. But yeah, he's right. There should be some kind of criteria that would show how loyal some people are compared to others in the aggregate, or the chances of their loyalty. You can't put people in a box categorically, but you can find commonalities that would lead you to think that they wouldn't be more loyal to the United States than another country. But those same criteria are never used when it comes to Zionist Jews. That's the priority over loyalty to the United States in many regards, and we're seeing it in these DEI carve-outs for Israel, the Israel first foreign policy, the mentality toward, joining in whatever regime change wars and military strikes Israel wants at the time. And it is U.S. politicians, too, that are evil and maniacal. I blame them for it, too, but that all is true.
Right? The same is true for a Russian. The U.S. wouldn't hire a Russian to be our Secretary of State, obviously. Right?
Yeah, and it wouldn't allow a Russian lobby to not register under FARA like it allows AIPAC to not register under FARA and essentially be a foreign lobby of our Congress. Exactly right, Ian.
Well, the existence of the State of Israel, unfortunately, makes Jews fit into this same category of foreign nationals with potential, even probable allegiance to another nation over this one, over America. And this is not some new idea. This was actually raised as an objection by Jews during the earliest talks about Zionism. And it was offered as a reason not to undertake the Zionist project. Because Jews are a stateless people living as guests and immigrants in other nations. And if you build a Jewish state, then that would cast suspicion on all Jewish people around the world as secretly working on behalf of the Jewish state, not their host nation.
Ian's right. This was a major argument against Zionism by Jews, actually, at the time, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, when Zionism really took root in the years before the Balfour Declaration and then leading up to the 47 and 48 UN partition plan. He's absolutely right that was an argument some Jews were making against Zionism, saying that, hey, this would expand the propensity for people to believe that there's this Jewish conspiracy theory that, the Jews want to take over the world or run the world or whatever, even though, because of the fact that there's a centralized state that many Jews would feel innately connected with, innately binded with and bonded with, despite the fact that they might be living thousands of miles away. He's absolutely correct about that.
Right? Nick elaborated in detail on how and why Jews so often became spies during the Cold War because of their Jewish identity and their inherent allegiance to Judaism over their own nation, and how this went both ways. American Jews spying on the Soviet Union, like Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, or Soviet Jews spying for the Americans. But when you introduce the Zionist project into the mix, you start to get Jews spying on behalf of Israel, like Jonathan Pollard or Arnon Milchan. There's a long list of these. Back in the day, they had to be secretive about it. But now, they just do it out in the open.
Yeah, and just think of the disconnect between finding out that there's a spy working within the U.S. intelligence apparatus giving our secrets to Israel, compared to if there was even a Soviet spy in the United States giving our secrets to the Soviet Union. That happened with Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, both of which were executed for doing that. I think the evidence is actually pretty clear that Julius was very heavily involved and Ethel was at least tangentially involved in that. But nonetheless, Jonathan Pollard was a spy for Israel, feeding Israel classified information from the United States. He basically got a prison sentence for it that resulted in, a 20-year prison sentence for it? Clinton pardoned or considered pardoning him. He didn't ultimately do that, and then Trump pardoned his handler, and Pollard got out in, I think, 2015. But that's how these things are treated. It's not consistent. If you're spying for Israel, that's just fine and honky-dory. We'll keep calling Israel our greatest ally in the Middle East, doing whatever we can to funnel money toward them. But when it came to the Soviet Union, those people were executed for sharing nuclear secrets with the Soviet Union. So there is a mass inconsistency here, and I think he's right to point this out.
This is how you get Ben Shapiro saying that the single greatest guarantor of his allegiance to America is the existence of Israel, meaning he supports America because and only as long as it is good for Israel. Right? Like, it's so frustrating to talk about because it feels like we live in backwards world. Like, where literally every day Twitter is filled with Jews advocating Israel first policies and Israel first propaganda and opinions, and they simultaneously say that it is anti-Semitic to say that Jews would ever work together or have greater allegiance to Israel than to their own nation.
Even when polls bear that out, I think it's a fair point. Obviously, that's a generality here, but that is true. Like a lot of people will say, like, there's this massive conspiracy that, Jews will just be loyal to their own, homeland more than they will of their country of residency, where they have citizenship, etc. But it does show that the overwhelming amount of Jews do. That's to say nothing about, again, the Jewish dissidents that are so right about why this is a plague mentality and why this actually leads to more anti-Semitism than you would get if you didn't have this kind of phenomenon, like the Israel First mentality, the DEI carve-outs, the whole propaganda machine propped up on the basis that, Israel has the right to defend itself, even though that's not what happens. It bombs all of its neighbors, essentially, maintains a secret nuclear weapons program, commits genocide in Gaza, and again, we're just supposed to not question that. It's all Hamas's fault the whole time. All 22 months of bombing, young children and pulling them out of the rubble, that's all Hamas, I guess.
Despite the fact that so many clearly do and aren't shy about saying so openly, like in one breath, Israel, everything, Israel first, Israel defend itself, Israel, and in the very next breath, you're anti-Semitic for saying that a Jewish person would put Israel's interests over their own countries, right?
Truth is often hard to be palatable or hard to swallow. That's the case.
Like, we can all see it. We all have eyes and ears and brains, most of us. And Nick Fuentes just isn't afraid to talk about it. I think that people over the age of 40, like Tucker probably included, don't realize just how many people are listening to Fuentes and waiting for anyone to debate him, like anyone at all, because it's becoming more and more apparent that the only reason Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro wouldn't want to debate him is because they know that they would lose dramatically.
Yeah, it might be the case, and I would love to see such debates happen. I'm kind of an open ideas guy. I support the open exchange of ideas, open debate of ideas, and if you believe that your case and your arguments are compelling against someone that has wrong-headed ideas, it behooves you to hold those debates, to have those debates, especially on subjects that you have a strong opinion on or have expertise on or are willing to talk about openly that are controversial in nature. I think the world needs more of that. I don't think it's right, though, to say that, Tucker and Candace aren't, free or, expressive on these topics either, maybe more recently. But, hey, it wasn't that long after the genocide began in Gaza that Candace started to speak out about it, to say, to denounce Brian Mast of Florida for saying there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian, to push back against the Israel Firsters who wanted this mass, sweeping response to October 7th that didn't match the proportion of the attack against Israel in the initial attack there, which wasn't really an initial attack. That was like an attack that happened in, 2023. But, the Palestinian people have faced subjugation since 1948 when their land was robbed from them and just given to Jews, many of which were Zionists from Europe, Ashkenazis coming to lay claim to the land that the UN was going to give them, and then ultimately taking more land than even the UN was going to give them, settled in the 48 war, and then the stream of wars that happened thereafter only solidified that, and Israel got Gaza in 1967. So, Gaza's not been treated very well, and the people living there by Israel since 1967, if well at all. I mean, they blockade to control the substances coming in. People don't have rights. They can't even go off the coast about a mile. They often can't even pass between the borders of Israel. It's a hard thing to be able to visit Green Line Israel or the West Bank, even if you're a Palestinian. And that's been the case for a long time. These people are subjugated. They have their electricity and food and water controlled by Israel. And I think all parties are right about that. But again, I think the big point of what I want to say in this is that I don't really have a huge horse in the race, but I do think it's a good thing that both Tucker and Candace and Fuentes are good on this issue. But the wedge is the point that really drives me crazy here. Because the thing that the regime, that the war machine, that the Israel First lobby would want more than anything is this feud between some of the top people on the right that are good on the Israel debate. So it behooves them to want to have a wedge to drive these people against each other at a time as critical as this, as Gaza's genocide plays out, as Israel tries to annex Gaza and prepares to occupy it while it's killing journalists. That's killed over 200 journalists in Gaza since this thing broke out anyways. It behooves us to be on the same page on that issue and not make the feuds the issue. When the feuds are the issue, that's wrong. And when people say, hey, you know, I'm making a video on it, yeah, I guess I am, but I wanted to drive that point home, that it doesn't benefit us in any way to have these people against each other, no matter who may be right on some of the particulars, which are just total minutia compared to the death and devastation that's happening there. We should be trying to get this thing ended, to get this mentality ended, this plague that infects our political system in the United States and the foreign influence from Israel that's pervasive within it. And again, this is what the propaganda machine would want more than anything. Wedges driven in the best and most popular people on the right on this issue at a time of such critical importance. Whether you think Candace is right, whether you think Tucker's right, whether you think Fuentes is right, that's the truth. And I don't, again, particularly care about who is right first. I care about what you do with the knowledge you have now. Very few people were born red-pilled and had all the best ideas about peace and war and opposition to the Israeli state and the military-industrial complex from birth. Tucker certainly didn't, Fuentes certainly didn't, Candace certainly didn't. And we all had a journey to learn the truth and open our eyes about this for the most part. That's not true about everyone, but for the most part that is true. So just making everything about that, who is right first, it doesn't help anyone. And it doesn't help anyone who comes on board. They should be welcomed with open arms and say, hey, brother, thanks for being on the right side of history here. Let's work together to do what we can to end it, whether it's through messaging or political campaigning or education, whatever mechanism you use. It's better to greet that person warmly than to say, haha, nana, nana, boo, boo. I was right when you were wrong. And now that you're right, I don't care. I was right first. That's a toxic attitude. It's something that I don't like to see in other issues, not just related to Israel, but also in this. So there's what I have to say about it. Let me know down below. Do you agree with me or Ian? Who is right in this feud? Is Tucker right? Is Fuentes right? Do you agree with my mentality toward the situation and why this looks like a psychological operation to split good people on this? Let me know down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Ian. I appreciate his coverage on this subject, which is really good, heartfelt. You can tell, you know, he's given his own side, and that's great. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel, which I'll really appreciate. And as thanks for that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.